Hello. Today we'll talk about the requirements, space requirement, focus on grow and fattening pigs. And to refer to it, we have to remember some concepts the speakers referred to yesterday. What's the origin of the swine? This is a social species living in groups, and they are always exploring and looking for food in the forests. Then there are some behavior explaining the way they live. There is an anti-predator behavior, so they do not feel threatened by their predators. They are always competing for resources, who will eat first, who will be the first one for water. They will communicate through vocalization. There are several and various sounds, and we know they used to communicate. And they have a very well-established hierarchy that generate conflicts because we do not know who is the dominant, and this is why fight starts. And that affects the behavior in the use of available space. On the other hand, Juliana presented it very well yesterday, is that they spend more than 75% of their time exploring. And this is a very important activity they had in their available space, and some of them are natural behavior. It is in their genetic code, so to speak, exploring, creating nests, using the mat, bath to control their temperature, and they like exercise and they like walking. And what does 7.13.13 article says? According to the available space, here the article highlights on what is what we need to take into account. Different areas to be standing up, to be on the floor, and the use density shall not negatively influence on the normal behavior of pigs. Then we have to consider what are normal behavior for pigs, needed for exploration, social coexistence, and we should avoid injuries or adverse effects on food, reproduction, water consumption, among others. And some of the behaviors are changed when they are in the nature and confined spaces because the spaces are different. Nature, in nature, stay for a long time in foraging, grazing, we would say. They spend a lot of time there in movement and not resting. And what happens in the confined space? Since there are no plenty of activities to do in the barns, they take a lot of time resting. In the different resting areas and food areas, they are pretty important. And when we have those poor or improper environment without enrichment, we talked about it yesterday, Professor Jeremy told it in a clear manner, he referred to it, we may have redirection of the exploratory behavior. Professor Karen referred to that in animals, and so that we can have stereotypes, uh, vices, and the redirected behavior to the environment structure. How a pig start biting a wall, a door, or any other structure. And this is the different regulations for spaces and some references. It refers to density, which is a starting point. In Brazil, we have today a standard, which is number 113 from December, referring to the concept of minimum space for animal during different stages of production, since a piglet until 30 kilograms, 30, 85, 110 kilos when it is fattening pigs. The regulation refers to the minimum that had to be used, and the minimum refers, for example, the ideal. It's different from the European regulation that refers to the area for different phases. And these are referenced by researchers have taken a lot into account when they conduct their studies on density and available space. And this is from 2016. Then this model does not necessarily take into account the behavioral needs of the animals, but they do take into account the developmental production indicators during the system. Then we can see here there are some differences, simple ones here in numbers, and some of them are very similar for some stages. But will it be that only the assessment of density is enough to talk about available space? It's not. This is also a complex concept, and we have to take this into account when it comes to the needs of heat transference of pigs. We have to understand that a pig does not sweat. Then it requires to lose heat in different ways or to also gain heat. 40% of heat loss is given through evaporation. Then they can evaporate through the mouth or through the skin. 20% through the natural convection of natural movements. 30% of loss through a forced connection when we use extractors and we increase the wind. And 5 to 10% through floor construction. You change the heat here, such as in the mud bath. And all this is influenced by the concept or by the body structure of these animals. And how is that? When we talk about thermal regulation, we can see two key points: the volume of the animal and the surface. And what happens today with modern pigs has less volume of fat and big volume of lean meat, and that produces a lot of heat. And what happens is that pig has a body structure, a big one. Then when we think about volume, the volume is correlated to the temperature gain. When it comes to the surface, it is related to the temperature loss. Then convection or heat conduction in the contact with the floor. Let's think of a pig. When we have a square, a small square, 2 per 2 meters, then we have a 24 square meter surface and a volume for that same square of 8 square meters. So there is a relation on heat loss, which is the surface correlated to the volume. And that would be around 3, because there is a surface area, a bigger one, proportionally big to the animal volume. Now let's think that this bigger square, this 4 by 4, is a fattening pig, 130 kilos. Then when we think of surface, which is the temperature loss, this pig has a surface of 93 square meters. But this animal itself has a volume of 64 square meters because there is a higher occupation area. And the relation with surface or correlation of surface and volume is 1.5. So what happens with this? A bigger animal has more difficulties to lose heat and than making their temperature change than a young animal. And this will result on how animal will experience the environment and refer to it. Therefore, for example, this slide presents an image with the thermal cameras in fattening pigs. What is what we see there? There is a growth barn here, and the violet or purple zones are the cold zones. Then there is a higher wind conduction from the cold vias. Animals are in yellow and they are on the floor, or they are leaning on the wall to avoid heat. So this is an example of how they are using the available space. And how can this be proven that that pig is suffering for cold, for example? If you see, I have applied these purple points, They are the ears, and the ears are points in animals with a high conductivity. These ears are 21 Celsius degrees in animals who would also be 34, which is the surface temperature. Then the concept of heat transfer is closely related to the concept of use of available space. Here there is another example on how the available space should take into account not only density, but also the temperature and ventilation conductivity. There is a heated floor for pigs. And we can see here that these animals wants to stay there in the heated floor, but they are active at the same time, and we can see that they are not all together. So they are not cold. There are some options so that pigs can change from a cold area to a hot area, heated area. And that shows the use of the resource in the available space. And coming back to the different regulations, these are for pigs who are under thermal stress. They need more space. Just because, or precisely due to this concept, animals have difficulties of losing temperature. And we can see that for fattening animals until 130 kilos, we can see an increase of almost 15% when we apply Brazilian regulation, and when we apply the European one, this is doubled in space. And that's a challenge in the field. Then we have to think that available space is not only density, but if we contribute with more resources for temperature control, we'd also work the management of thermal stress. For example, available space. In the end, it is a multi-factor evaluation. We have to take into account the type of floor. Is this a slate? What material is it? Is it a high conductivity or low conductivity material? Is it compact? Is it, can this be heated, or can the heat be exchanged? Because wind can go through here. Do we have a good ventilation? Do we have more heat exchange through conductivity? Do we need that for the animal? What's the thermal sensation, the effective one in this area, and how animal behavior is shown, is manifested? And precognize densities at a starting point, because in many opportunities we may have them and they might not be good. For example, we can see clearly here in this slide, density continues or follows the Brazilian legislation, but there is a situation of heat and suffocation due to low ventilation rate. The bars, you can see them, those division bars are too high here. And what happens, that wind goes through the upper part, and here heat is maintained. So when we think of the concept of animal welfare, of these 5 domains, on animals, on how their healthcare is like, behavior, environment, normal behavior, mental states, we can see here that this suffocation generates hyperthermia in the pigs, and this will generate a change in their behavior. This animal will start to evacuate or to defecate in all the barn to modulate their temperature using the change in temperature through their feces, which are humid, and that will accumulate mass. It will generate immunosuppression, injuries, diseases, and it will also affect the behavior of pigs. They become more apathic, they reduce the food consumption, and this will all make all this environment worse, and everything is related, and they suffer from mental status such as weakness, frustration, heat. And what happens with the farm? We had injury, low performance of food, weight gained, and high immune suppression with the increase of injuries in their skin and foot and feet. So the evaluation of available space is multi-factor. We need to look at the behavior of animals, and here we can see an example where you saw these mats. So they are on an area with a less conductivity of heat, and they change temperature in an easier way that piglets have it easier. Here we can see another example. You see clean areas. They favor the unit from behind. It's a clean area here. And if you look at it, you will see those divisions. They are proper ones, favoring a better wind flow. Here, there's another example with bigger animals. You can see that they stay clean. They have animals distributed. They are following the regulation of density. We can see here an example of group gestation pigs, and today we have talked about it on the need for leak areas, so these animals do not fight. This is important in producers or reproducers. I don't have an answer for that. Until a point where we raise or we rear fattening pigs in big areas, these alternatives wouldn't be that important with these animals that today are raised and they have a different behavioral profile. That was a question I saw sometime for us in this talk. Let me give you a final message about space. The first one is, I have always maintained this. Gustavo Oliva helped me with this presentation, is that animal behavior is highly related to the space availability. The quality of the environment is a fundamental factor for the use of the available space. In many opportunities, we get a correct density, but if the environment is improper, the use of available will be bad. References are important. Yes, they are, as a principle, as a guide to start a project, because they allow us to know the start point, but we need to consider all quality of environment and the need of the species so that we can use the space effectively by ensuring the welfare. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like to thank Gustavo for having helped me from Brazil, and am I available now for questions? Ready, we got a question here. What would you recommend, for example, because you showed improper ventilation? How can you improve ventilation when the facilities are already improperly designed? In many opportunities, this is an individual assessment. There is no general recommendation because in many times it depends on what the problem of design is. If we have, for example, small pens or the division is not the best, then there will be a change to be made in the divisions because wind or thermal feeling and the wind movement need to get to the peak's height. So that would be the first individual assessment to be conducted and understand why that is happening. And in many times, we have to change the facility to have that, to make this ventilation effective. Thank you very much, Juliana. And the second question is, what changes would have to be applied in space availability for fattening pigs and monocastrated? I don't know if I understood correctly, but at present there is no change in space in terms of density for immune castrated pigs. The recommended space is the same one for fattening pigs. What happened with these animals? We need to understand that some behavior is not that regular in castrated pigs. surgically castrated, the sodomy behavior, which is acting sexually. So in this type of animals, we test leak areas. That's an option for this pig who is being harassed, so to speak, and feel the rest is being aggressive with them. So it's understanding the behavioral needs under this category, because many males start presenting active sexual behavior at the end of their fattening stage. Probably no more space, but the space area should be more intelligently designed, enabling animals to understand and to have the possibility to escape. Thank you very much. We have more questions, but I will try to be brief. In racing with profound bed in fattening pigs, what would your recommendation be when it comes to animal density? Unfortunately, I cannot give you that answer. Well, but I can look for it and send it to you. Final question. In shed with control environment, the density by raising a stage of pigs varies, or is it maintained with what we have currently? What happened here is that there are some recommendations seeking to reduce density when we have the temperature control. But we need to understand that density is focused on the space availability when they are in different body postures. So they can look for the creation of these different areas, raising food, clean areas. Temperature control is an added tool so that we can favor the use of the available space intelligently, because if we start decreasing density in a great deal, we may have the development of behaviors, undesired behaviors, such as behavioral vices of tail biting, because in this problem, the available space, specifically density, is a much more important factor. Then we need to find a balance in order to guarantee good productivity with the development of proper behavior. Perfect, thank you very much. And as I comment, it's a thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. Maybe you can go deeper on the research of immune castration. That would be wonderful. It could be implemented. Thank you very much. And that concludes the Q&A part. In Brazil, immune castration is very well spread. It's done in more than 80% of the swine sounder. And fortunately, we have a specific talk about immune castration. We have one of the speakers referring to that subject. That would be later. He's much more of an expert than I am. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juliana. Such an extraordinary presentation.